Welcome to Beliefs of the Heart Weekly Reflection. I'm Sam Williamson, and today we're discussing discovering a transcendent pursuit. I would like to talk about a spiritual practice a friend of mine and I began 15 years ago, literally 2010. So I've done this for 15 years. This is my 16th year. And my friend Gary Barcalow and I were talking 15 years ago right now, and he asked me if I usually did a New Year's resolution. And I said, I just hadn't done one for years. And he said he hadn't done one for years. And it's not that none of us had ever had one that didn't work, although I think both of us agreed that most of them had failed after like 3 or 4 months, if we made it that long. But I would say most of my deepest changes have happened at other times during the year. I recognize God doing something. He speaks to me at a retreat. Something happens. And so I feel like my deepest changes have not happened as a result of New Year's resolutions. I'm not knocking New Year's resolutions. And actually, this is the first year I've done. This year I actually did a New Year's resolution. But my friend Gary and I both had an interest in 2010, 15 years ago, in taking a little time to think about what God was up to in our individual lives. So, just taking a week or two to pray and say, God, what are you doing? What have you been speaking? How have you been arranging my life? And then how can I cooperate with what you are focusing on? And we decided to call this time Discovering a Transcendent Pursuit, something that we would pursue, a spiritual, life-changing thing to pursue that would be meaningful. It would have deep change. It would be transcendent. We connected it with the idea of an examined life, not a self-centered life, I hope. That might be a transcendent pursuit to get rid of a self-centered life. But we connected it with an examined life. And the idea of an examined life is we go through life sometimes just not aware that God is shaping and forming us, but we just bounce around and we don't cooperate with it. I used to have a friend who was in the Rangers and Special Forces, and they had, after every battle, they would write an after-action report. And one of their mottos was, the battle isn't over until all the bullets have been counted. And he said the idea was, you're in the middle of a battle, and of course you want to win the battle, but the main value of that individual battle isn't that hill that you take this time, but it's what have we learned so next time we can take 2 hills, or we can take that hill with fewer casualties. So we want to count the battles, we want to count the bullets, we want to understand where everybody was so that we can learn from it. And my friend Gary and I said, how can we look at the battles of our last year or years and say, what is God up to? What can I learn to this? What is God up to so I can cooperate with him? Now, some of these are good things, like God is calling me to love him more. God is calling me to know him more. God is calling me into a deeper relationship. Sometimes it's things like, what sins have I been ignoring? One of the penalties of continuing sin is our gradual acceptance of it. We gradually get used to it until we get to the place where it doesn't even feel like sin. So I would say a difference between a New Year's resolution and a transcendent pursuit, Gary's and my idea of a transcendent pursuit. So this is our armchair definition, but a New Year's resolution tends to be a specific goal or a to-do. And it often tends to be a restriction, like I'm going to eat less or I guess exercise more. Whereas a transcendent pursuit is usually not as specifically goal-oriented as a pursuit, something that I think God is up to in my life. Like God might be calling me to be more intimate with him. God might be calling me to love him more. God might be calling me to hope in him more. And, I can't at the end of the year say, okay, I increased in hope by 17 degrees. I mean, it's the idea is, how can I just grow in hope? How can I see him as my answer? It tends to be more spiritual and mysterious. A transcendent pursuit is not typically a discipline, although I'd say New Year's resolutions are more discipline oriented. but it's an investment. It's like you're putting your money into a stock and you're saying, I want to see that stock grow and multiply. It's an investment. The transcendent pursuit is not stopping something mostly, but it's multiplying something. It's a pursuit, not a to-do list. A transcendent pursuit, I'm telling you, this may sound boring to you, but it's exciting to me. I have found this to be life-changing. I focus not on weaknesses. This is where I'm thinking about what is going to be for a given year. I don't focus on weakness, although sometimes I have to, but mostly I focus on what God-given strengths might God want me to invest in. At the same time, my friend Gary and I were talking about transcendence pursuits. I was reading a book written, I think almost 100 years ago. It was a book by an English Christian playwright named Dorothy Sayers. And she wrote a book called The Mind of the Maker. And she talks about artistry, but she also talks about living for God. And she says, this is a quote from her book, she says, a quote from Mind of the Maker. She said, when a job is undertaken from necessity, the worker is self-consciously aware of the toils and pains he might undergo. But when a job is a labor of love, the sacrifices themselves present themselves to the worker, strange as it seems, in the guise of enjoyment. Moralists, looking at this, will always say that the former kind of sacrifice, duty, toil, pain, is more admirable than the latter, because the moralist, whatever he may pretend, has more respect for pride than for love. And then she concluded, she said, I do not mean there's no nobility in doing unpleasant things from a sense of duty, but only that there is more nobility in doing them sheerly out of love of the job. And this is what I'm talking about when I say I want to focus not on the weaknesses or the toils, but I want to focus on a God-given strength. What has God put in my heart? What good deeds has God put in my heart that I just love to do? How can I work on that and do them more sheerly out of the love of the job? Because God is stirring something. He's sharpening something. He's shaping something. He's encouraging something in my life. I have found 14 of my 15 transcendent pursuits, one didn't work so well, but 14 of my 15 have been more of an adventure. They've just been an exciting adventure every single year. It's not a goal or an objective as much as it's an adventure. So my friend Gary and I, 15 years ago, January 2010, we took 2 weeks to say, okay, we're not doing New Year's resolutions. We're going to do a transcendent pursuit, whatever that is, because he and I hadn't figured it out much. And after 2 weeks, I came back with this as my transcendent pursuit. It was, I want to reflect and express. Now, all my other transcendent pursuits have sounded a little bit more spiritual than my very first one, but honestly, that was one of the best things because I prayed, and the words in my brain that kept coming back was just reflect and express, reflect and express. And what I meant was I felt like I was beginning to see truths just in life around me. I would go to Panera's and I'd overhear someone talking about something, and it would stir in my mind, in my heart, a spiritual truth. Or I'd read it in a book, I'd read it in scripture, I'd have it in a conversation with somebody. And truths just kept coming. And I wanted to be able to not just let that moment pass, but take time to reflect on that truth. And then I would take time to express that truth in a compelling way. So literally that year, I started writing my Beliefs of the Heart website, where I was writing sort of weekly articles. And I wrote 45 articles. Now notice my goal, I did not have a New Year's resolution that said write an article every week. Instead, I had a transcendent pursuit to reflect and express, just to think about truth and then write it and then express it. I didn't even say write. I wasn't even thinking about articles, but to express it in a compelling way. Let me give you an example. One of the articles I wrote sort of became, mini viral for me, but I had about 500,000 people read that particular article that was called, "Is Sunday School Destroying Our Kids?" Now, I don't think Sunday school is destroying our kids, but partway through that article, my first draft said, the gospel is God loving us when we don't deserve it. So I think that was a pretty good truth. That was a reflection. I'm saying, I don't deserve God's love, but he loves me anyway. But then when I spent time trying to express it, so I reflected, the gospel is God loving me when I don't deserve it. But later on, when I expressed it, I realized I'm talking about Sunday school, and to capture it in the sense of Sunday school, my second draft was, the wonder of the gospel is not love of the beauty. It's that beauty kisses the beast. And you know what? I read that right now, and I'm moved that the beauty would kiss me. The Father, the Lord, would love me enough to care for me, to count my tears in a bottle, to keep my tears in a bottle, to count the hairs on my head. 15 years later, I'm moved by my own writing. That's a little embarrassing. But other years that I've had, I had several years where I had one year where I just meditated on, I am the vine, I am the branch. You are, the Lord is the vine and we are the branches. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. But that was, I was focused on an intimacy with God. What does it mean? And that was triggered by me reading in my daily prayer time in Luke, Martha, Martha, you are anxious and troubled about many things, but one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the good portion, which shall never be taken from her. And I thought, Lord, I'm troubled by many things. I'm really Martha. I want to focus. I want to choose the good portion, which will never be taken from me. And that's an intimacy with God. Mary just sat by Jesus' feet. And so I had a Transcendent pursuit. This was like 2013, 14, 15. I can't remember. I've got them written down somewhere. There was just, how can I be intimate with God? And I'm telling you, it changed my life. I feel like I ratcheted myself into a newer position where I look at scripture and I see intimacy with God everywhere. And I see these beautiful comments about God where God is both our King and he's Lord, but he is the potter and we are his works of art. You know, I see the vine and the branches. I feel like 1 year of focusing on intimacy with God changed my life. In 2020, after I'd done several different kinds of intimacy with God years, I focused on Jesus as Lord. This is 2020. And I wrote down in my journal, I said, I've looked at God as my friend, as my savior, my brother, my father, the source of life, the vine. This year I sense God calling me to see him as Lord, like Lord. And Lord means I don't know where he's taking me. Remember when Abram at the time was called away from his land, it says, he went with God, not knowing where he was going. The Lord was the Lord, and Abram said, I'm going to go with you, even though I don't know where you're taking me. And I felt like in my year of Jesus as Lord, it meant obedience over understanding. I want to understand. Remember, my very first one was reflect and express. I want to understand, but I felt like God saying, no, right now I want you to just see me as Lord and say, the Lord's ways are better than my ways, and I will obey. Partly because I love him, partly because I just know his ways are better. It meant if he's Lord, I want to give up my right to myself, my right to success, my right to plans, my right for ideas, my life for success. Like if I do something, maybe it won't work, but he is Lord. It means, I heard a sermon years ago, your arm is too short to box with God. If he is the Lord, I don't want to box with God. I don't want to wrestle with God. I don't want to fight him. I don't want to box him because my arms are too short. I want to say, maybe I can't understand because I'm not spiritually mature enough. Maybe it's just because you're infinite, but your ways are always better. It means you're Lord. I'm not. And I would say at the end of 2020, when all kinds of things happened, I mean, this is the year of COVID. At the end of it, I feel like it was a time of my greatest worship that I've ever offered, where I just say, Lord, you're Lord. And I love the fact you're Lord. So you know what I did in 2021? 21, my transcendent pursuit was, I want to sense my own wickedness. It sounds terrible. It sounds like the exact opposite of all these encouraging and multiplying. But you know what? I felt like the more I understood the real wickedness in my heart, the self-centeredness, the desire to have my own way, the more I sensed it, the more I sensed God's love. I'd say, oh, he loved me even when I was like this. He loved me even when I was that. I felt like there was a kind of honesty I had with myself, where instead of trying to justify myself by saying, I have a good heart, I really meant well, I just said, oh my gosh, Father, I really was self-centered there, wasn't I? I tried to sense my wickedness. And as I sensed my wickedness, I felt the love of God in a way I've never felt it. Really, honestly, it's like the most oxymoronic thing that I sense that I have a year sensing my wickedness and I end up with a year sensing his love. So anyway, I just gave you a few examples of reflect and express, he is Lord, sensing my own wickedness. And I can tell you, these have been life-changing. These have been spiritual. It's like year-long retreats where I'm on a retreat when I'm at Panera's. I'm on a retreat when I'm at church. I'm on a retreat when I'm having coffee with my wife. I feel like God is doing something in my heart. It's a short season of reflection and examination. When I was doing the 1 year, this is the year 2020, where Jesus is Lord, I read this in my utmost for its highest. When the writer Chambers, Oswald Chambers, who had put together a little Bible college that had 18 people. I mean, Oswald Chambers, I always think of as this big name. He sold 50 million copies, but he had a little Bible college that had only 18 people, and yet he's changed the world. And you know what he said about that college? He said, this college has no value as an organization, not even academically, because it wasn't accredited. He said, not even academically. This college's sole value for existence is for God to help himself to our lives. Will we allow him to help himself? Or are we more concerned about our own ideas of what we're going to be? I think in a certain sense, every time I do a transcendent pursuit, I'm saying, God, I want you to help yourself to my life. I want to cooperate with that. So how do I do this? So I normally take a couple weeks. I always say I'm going to take it at the end of the year, in December. Then I'm always so busy with Christmas stuff, I don't do it. So I usually do it at the beginning of January, but this January I had pneumonia and I wasn't able to do it. So I'm doing it now. I'm going to take a couple weeks now to figure out what is my transcendent pursuit for 2025. And what I usually do is I take maybe 2 weeks and I pray. I just say, God, what are you up to? I ask some close friends, I say, what do you see in my life? What have I talked about as struggles or victories, or what is something that I keep bringing up? What do you think God is up to in my life? I ask Carla, my wife. I ask Gary, my friend. I ask a couple other friends. I write just down a bunch of questions.
All designed to foster
so that's the first thing is I ask God, I ask friends, I pray, what is God up to?
Who is there?
I write down questions like I write on a whiteboard to say, what am I curious about? What is stirring in my mind? What's just moving me right now? Like, did you notice when I just read the Oswald Chambers things, I teared up. And I thought, God is moving me in this way. The fact that I tear up in this podcast, which is a little embarrassing, I think this might have something to do for 2025. How can I allow God to help himself to my life? So what's moving me? So I ask God, I say, what am I curious about? What's stirring me? I sometimes say, what is the one truth I wish I knew better? Or I say, what has God's activity been in my life? Things that he keeps bringing up over and over and over again. Maybe there's sins that I keep doing over and over again, and God sort of keeps bringing it up. Or the next question I ask is, what season am I in? Now, the season could be retirement, if somebody retired. They could be an empty nester if their kids just left, and they've gone to college. It could be that they have a new job. It could be a new service that God has brought up. This last year, 2024, I decided at the beginning of the year that my theme, my transcendent pursuit was waiting on the Lord. January 1st, I actually did it that year at the beginning of the year. I'm going to wait on the Lord. And a couple weeks later, the church that I've started going to in the last few years asked me if I'd be the worship leader. Now, I haven't been a worship leader at a church for 15 years, 10 years at least. I think 15 years. And so I started becoming the worship leader. And I got to say, I have just been enjoying it like I have never, ever enjoyed it in my life. I became a worship leader when I was 15 and was basically constantly a worship leader, probably from age 15 until age 45 or 50. I mean, the vast majority of my life, then I quit doing it. And God called me back, and I've enjoyed it like I never have in my life, ever. And you know what? It wasn't something I sought. It wasn't something I pursued. It wasn't a New Year's resolution. I just waited on the Lord. I said, I'm going to wait on the Lord. And the Lord brought something in my life that's been great. So that question I was responding to was, what season am I in? And the season I was in was waiting on the Lord. That's what I felt like last year's was. Another question I'm sometimes asked is, what feels spiritually urgent to me? And I do a brain dump. I either do it on a whiteboard. I have a whiteboard in my office, or else I do it on a piece of paper. And I say, what sounds like a chore? What sounds like an adventure? What sounds like the call of God? What is quickening in my heart? What keeps coming back? What feels spiritually urgent to me? And at the end of 2 weeks, and one other point is, I normally do this with a few friends. So I told you I asked some friends for their advice, but I also have a friend that he and I both do our transcendent pursuits together. We talk about it, we share about it, and then we both come up with it. And then we both talk about it throughout the year. You know, the reality is my wife and my friends tend to know me better than I know myself. At least they know things about me that I don't know. They're aware of things that I'm unaware of. And I find their advice very, very helpful. Then we write it down, I share it with friends, and I see what God is up to. So all of this was to invite you to consider doing a transcendent pursuit with me this year. Take the next couple weeks and ask yourself the questions. I will somehow put them into the show notes for the podcast so that you can see the questions I think of. And they're not restricted to that, but they're the kind of question I ask. And as I brainstorm, other questions come up. I would say take a couple weeks, think, pray, share with friends, watch what God is up to, and just write something. And then in a couple of weeks, I'm going to share what my new transcendent pursuit is and the process I went through. I encourage you to email me ideas, your transcendent pursuits and your questions. You know, again, my email is sam@beliefsoftheheart.com. sam@BELIEFS, beliefsoftheheart.com. Email me with questions, ideas, your own transcendent pursuits, and let's together see what God is up to. Hey, everybody, thanks for listening to this. And I really do pray that together we can cooperate with what God is up to, and that together we can let him help himself to our lives. Thanks, everybody. See you in a couple weeks. Bye.
Thanks for listening. Please join us by following this podcast or liking it. And visit our website, beliefsoftheheart.com, for more articles, books, videos, podcasts, and courses, all designed to foster intimate theology, deepening a real relationship with the real God who is there. See you next week.